a young perspective on hot-button issues around the world. This is The Hub.
Hello and welcome to The Hub. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. China's economy has shown resilience in the first half of 2026, marking the beginning of China's 15th five-year plan. According to the latest data from the National Bureau of Statistics, China's GDP grew 4.7% year-on-year in the first half of the year. Foreign trade reached 25.6 trillion yuan, that is up 16.9%, while retail sales of goods and services increased by 2.7%. The State Council has also approved a plan to expand consumption during the 15th five-year plan period recently, signaling a strong focus on domestic demand as a key driver of future growth. Now, to discuss these questions, we're joined in Beijing by Han Hua, co-founder and Secretary General of the Beijing Club for International Dialogue. Zhang Gan is Professor of Economics at the University of International Business and Economics, and Andy Mok, author of The Innovation Machine, How China Creates and Adopts Technology Through Governance. Now, Ms. Han Hua, let me go to you. China's economy grew 4.7% in the first half of 2026, despite global headwinds. How do you assess China's economic performance in the first half of the year?
I will leave numbers to economists, but I want to try to look at what they usually try to explain away. Certainly, this number of growth rate in today's geopolitical climate change, success, not just economic momentum, but more of institutional resilience. China is navigating through tariffs, technology restrictions, supply chain shifts, and still moving forward faster than many expected. So I think the real secret formula is its adaptive capacity and its resilient capabilities. If the global economy is a stress test, China isn't just merely passing the test. It's not just merely surviving. It is still growing with its resilience against all odds.
It is growing with resilience. Now, Professor Zhang Gan, China's high-tech manufacturing continued to outperform in the first half of the year, a bright spot of China's growing momentum. At the same time, a new wave of exports, now often described as China's new three, namely artificial intelligence, robotics, and innovative medicines, is gaining traction in global markets and among global investors. How are these industries reshaping China's competitive edge?
Well, I think China is in a transition period right now. I think we're clearly seeing some people call it like a fork development pattern. In other words, there are sectors in the economy that are doing very, very well. These are typically sort of what I call it, frontier technologies. And on the other hand, we also have the traditional economy out of it. Like the real estate development, for example, the other sort of more traditional industries. I think it's a clear pattern here that the first category of parts of the economy are doing very well, whereas the second part just being mediocre. Now the issue is that the first part, as a percentage of total GDP, is still quite small. So even if it's growing very fast, it's not able to pull up the entire economy, fast enough. It's not able to, percolate down the rest of the economy. That's what I call the challenge. That's what I mean by the transition period. And I think what's pretty clear at this point is that China's economy is very much driven by innovations. And the three new things you just described, these are all things at the frontier. These are clearly driven by innovation. The AI model, for example, the biomedical stuff. I mean, it's all driven by innovation. So I think we are looking forward to a high quality growth pattern, a innovation driven growth pattern, and it's the good news is that it's actually indeed taking place. It's happening right now, and I think the momentum is going to continue. And even amidst the waves of protectionism coming from the United States, coming from the European Union, China's exports are still doing very competitively. So I think this pattern is still going to continue for some time.
Right, talking about innovation, Andy, you argued that China is this innovation machine and pulled this off largely through governance and good governance, to be exact. How do you see your philosophies applying to China's first half economic growth?
Well, Wang Guan, thank you for mentioning that. In my book, I lay out this model called the I-5 framework that does for explaining governance what Michael Porter, the Harvard Business School professor's book on competitive strategy, the five forces model, did for corporate strategy. And I think if we apply this model, what we see is China has a very strong ability to go from idea to institutions to instruments to infrastructure to impact. And I want to add a little bit of color here on the first half 2026 growth statistics. So China's economy is about 20 trillion US dollars. And at its current growth rate of about 4-ish percent, it's going to add about $1 trillion US dollars in economic output. And that is the size of a mid-sized European economy like a Poland. So, when we hear some of the commentary about this China growth slowdown, in one sense, it's not incorrect when we compare it to historical GDP growth figures, but I think it does overlook the triumph of governance that China has demonstrated when we look at it in absolute terms. And it's important to point out here, too, whether we're talking about in China or any of the countries that buy and enjoy Chinese exports.
Secretary Han Hua, as Chinese products gain popularity worldwide, some countries have argued that China's industrial growth has created so-called overcapacity and responded, therefore, with tariffs and non-tariff barriers. China's Ministry of Commerce responded, issuing this position paper, arguing that it is not overcapacity. Actually, it is capability to produce those products, and it's an undercapacity of some other countries. How can countries, in your opinion, address these divergence of views while preserving this open and rules-based global trading system?
Well, in my opinion, I think these European countries, including America, they kind of overlook the balance sheets from both ends. One side is the consumption, and the other side is the so-called overcapacity or the supply side. So while China expanding its consumption, not only for the domestic market, it is called dual circulation, not only in the domestic market, but also to the world market. It is creating not only the products made in China, made from China, I think it creates some new way, new ecosystem of providing solutions, alternatives in this ever-changing geopolitical environment. Providing solutions and alternatives is much better than providing the sanctions and the restrictions over the free flow of products and the solutions. So the new News 3, we just talked about the EVs. In addition to the EV, solar panels, batteries, we have biomedicines, we have the new solutions and applications from the AI advanced technologies. So I think it's really kind of not wise to have these trade sanctions or the tariffs barriers towards China, but rather than to have more in-depth dialogues and conversations to discuss what kind of channels, what kind of alternatives and solutions to make it the feedback and the new channels for each and every country's development at a different pace.
Hey there, global listeners. Get ready for the hottest discussions on the airwaves. Roundtable, your passport to the heart of China's buzzing society. Pressing issues, lifestyle trends, and impactful policies, we're tackling them head on with wit, wisdom, and a whole lot of fun. Discover the real China through the eyes and voices of its people. Gain a unique global perspective on topics that resonate universally. Tune in and turn up the excitement dial on Roundtable as we bridge gaps and break barriers one discussion at a time. Don't just listen, be transformed.
Figures suggest that these sanctions actually defeats its purpose. Now, let's talk about something slightly more exciting. Now, Professor Gong, sports industry. This summer, there has been this spectacular World Cup in Canada, Mexico, and the United States. At the same time, don't forget about Chinese Super Cups and Village Cups that is taking place across China. the grassroots sports taking China by storm, amateur footballers becoming stars and football sensations celebrated on social media. This whole industry, whole ecosystem that is taking place, a burgeoning industry. Professor Gong, how do you look at this role of sports industry in driving the Chinese economy and potentially driving the economy even further going forward?
Well, I think let me start by saying that your example of referring to the soccer game is actually a very perfect example of address your previous question about overcapacity. In my view, overcapacity should be defined in a global context. We never complain about overcapacity in soccer. Chinese people here in China, watching the World Cup games in the middle of the night, 3 a.m. in the middle of the night, and we never complain, there's overcapacity here, right? We are watching the domestic games. You're also watching the World Cup, the best of the soccer playing skills on display.
Even with the expanded World Cup, 48 teams and potentially 64 or 80 something, we never complain. Not over capacity. The more the merrier, right?
We never complain
the more
about
the merrier.
Yeah. So my
Fair
point,
play.
the point I'm trying to make is that overcapacity should be defined in a global context, and whose capacity is in access should be defined, should be chosen by the market, should be defined and chosen by consumers. As long as Chinese products are being very welcome all around the world, as long as Chinese cars are being still bought by European consumers, even at the cost of very high tariffs, I think it's a very vivid example of showing whose capacity is in access right now. So I think I think the question about overcapacity should be really looking at consumer choice, and I think the European decision makers, the policy makers should take a harder look at the industrial status in Europe and ask this question: why European automakers are left behind, are being abandoned by European consumers. And not, I think the idea of setting up tariffs, trying to fend off imports of cars from China, from BYD, from Korea automobile, is a losing path in my view. I mean, it's not going to address their problem, and it's even going to make their industrial capacity of making cars even more inaccess, even more backward, even more outdated. So I think this is a way to address it, to embrace the challenge and think about ways to address these problems for the future.
The U.S. leader, if he does visit Shenzhen later this year, he can check out some Chinese EVs and test drive himself, and this can potentially settle this debate once and for all. Now, Andy, let's talk about innovation. Companies such as Chinese DRAM chip market CXMT have attracted market attention after entering the capital market. What does this development of companies in strategic technology sectors say about China's industrial upgrading, and how can China continue to move toward higher quality innovation and growth?
That's a great question, Guan. And, of course, everyone is paying a lot of attention to CXMT's IPO. But I think the more interesting story, if we want to understand, China's stage of development and how this actually might offer lessons for other countries around the world, is we have to look behind the company to the city of Hefei. And many people look at Hefei and say, oh, there's a Hefei model. These guys were such smart venture capital investors. But there's a little bit more to this story. So Hefei actually started with quantum computing. And they decided that they wanted to make their municipal identity rest on frontier technology. And this was kind of an apprenticeship, teaching them how to manage frontier technology that did not have an immediate revenue model. And I'll skip some of the details in between, but I think this is what prepared them to take the risk of backing a brand new startup, which is what CXMT was, right? So Zhu Yiming, the founder, brilliant student, physics background, but at the time, this was not an established company. So the Hefei government was able to deal with the emotional and financial roller coaster of investing in memory chips, which can be fabulously profitable when the market is strong, but lose stunning amounts of money when the market is weak. And I think, again, this shows the strength of governance in China, that there, of course, is the central government that sets the strategic direction. But there are hundreds, maybe if not, at least many hundreds, of mayors throughout the country who act independently to realize this vision, because when they are able to succeed with companies like CXMT, the local GDP grows, employment grows, the tax base grows, and of course, this shows their readiness to be promoted to higher levels of government. So again, I would see this as a governance story where we're focusing on the municipal level governance within the larger framework of national governance.
I mean, that is a very important distinction, the grassroots governance that is so much a vibrant part of what makes Chinese governance arguably one of the more effective and meritocratic anywhere in the world. Now, Secretary Han Hua, let's talk about China travel, because China travel has been a hashtag taking the digital world by storm. And this summer in particular, China Cool is this hashtag, a phrase that is very popular with youth from around the world, because they found China an increasingly attractive place that is backed up by numbers. Inbound tourism market is recovering with nearly 23 million foreign visitor entries, should I say, in the first half of the year. That is a 20% increase year on year. As travelers seek deeper cultural and lifestyle experiences, how do you think China can further unlock the potential of inbound tourism?
China travel is certainly one of the most interesting examples, showing that when income rise, people spend less on owning things and more on living well. And this is the pattern we have seen in every advanced economy already, and now it is happening in China. Certainly, visa-free policies have made China easier to visit, but policy alone does not explain this, such a great enthusiasm towards China. So visitors are discovering China offers not only as a destination for this kind of traditional tourism, but also a vast range of exploring experiences to live like Chinese people do on a daily basis. So still some come to China, to Beijing and Xi'an for get the kind of reconnect with our 5,000 years of history of our own civilization. Others head to Shenzhen, just like Wang Guanyu mentioned, that when the APEC happens in Shenzhen in November, there will be new world of zest coming to Shenzhen to have a glimpse of the future city, where EVs, drones, robotics are all, integrated in this most advanced, city, one of the most advanced city in China, also AI as well. And still, medical and wellness, which integrates the Chinese traditional medicine, this kind of tourism is also expanding to our happy surprise, combining the world-class hospitals, combining, the very good services at a comparatively low price. They are becoming a new destination of China travel, and not to mention the food, the sports, concerts, museums. For my own experience, I have friends and relatives from outside of Beijing and even from United States, from Europe. They are coming to Beijing, and it's very hard for them to get a ticket to Palace Museum within 1 week. So in short, this is not only about China travel, it is also about soft power and influence upgraded. So countries earn influence not only by exporting products, but by creating this kind of integrated experience on daily basis, so people can remember and can memorize longer and want to share with their own communities. So every satisfied tourist can become not only a storyteller, can be an ambassador of China's soft power.
Very good. Now, Professor Zhang Gan, how do you look at this? I mean, what do you think is behind the fact that China is once again becoming a more coveted travel destination for international tourists?
Well, I think Hanwha has already touched on a lot of bases. I think it's no denying that as a country further develops, its living standard keeps rising and the infrastructure keeps getting much better. The message is out that this is a wonderful place to visit. Let alone it has a history of over 6,000 years, a lot of cultural heritages, historic spots of interest. All of these things could be very attractive to foreign visitors. Now, let me also mention that the narrative about China is starting to change. I think for so much time, for a long, long time, the portrayal of China, the image of China has been sort of described in a not so positive light by the Western media. But now they can't conceal the fact anymore. The messages are getting out. People are more people are starting to realize it is totally different from what is being portrayed on CNN, on Fox News, on BBC. You look at the infrastructure. There's some talk about China is the future, represents the future. China is exactly what these countries are going to have in 30 years. We're 20 to 30 years ahead compared to many other countries, in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the convenience of life and quality of life. So I think the message is out through social medias. And that's the reason why people are coming to China in droves. And the last fact I want to mention is that China's visa policy, we are making things a lot easier for many countries, people to come to visit China. Many more countries are enjoying the status of visa-free status. Applying for a visa is also a lot easier. So, and also it's quite affordable these days. I mean, you look at the price levels in China, it's pretty low compared to many other countries.
Low price, but good quality, affordable living. Andy, how would you explain the China travel rush?
Well, I think, to add to what already has been said, I think we also need to consider the role of TikTok. So, before there was a TikTok in the United States, again, most people had very negative impressions of China because of a biased media coverage. But with TikTok, we had people exposed to Chinese technology. So there are literally millions of people in the United States that make their living as TikTok creators. And remember when there was the threat of TikTok being banned and we saw all these TikTok refugees going to Red Note. And I think what we're seeing is the flip side of that. Because of TikTok, because of Labubu, because of Nuja, etc., that there's an increasingly positive view of China amongst young people all around the world. And that is driving this desire to come and see for yourself in China. And I'm very optimistic, Guan, because again, this is starting with the young people. And, the older, perhaps we can call them dinosaurs, that are set in their ways, that believe that, China is bad no matter what. These are generally the older people. So I think this paints, I think, a very bright future for Chinese soft power, which includes tourism, culture, etc.
Now, indeed, China's economy is impacting the rest of the world. China's economic transformation is not only reshaping its own development model, but also influencing global industry, supply chains, and consumption patterns. So, Secretary Han Hua, from a global perspective, what opportunities does China's ongoing economic transformation, emphasis on new quality productive forces, innovation, create for the global economy?
China's trade and import and export with almost, like I said, all the countries in the world. So if China shows more trade resilience and it shows the product, its manufacturing capacity can be more diverse, it certainly brings more confidence to the world economies and to the other markets. A decade ago, many assume that China's export and China's connectivity with the world economy is mainly about the low-cost manufacturing, about made in China, about the low-price products, and only about the Western markets are China's only economic development opportunities. Nowadays, the picture is much more broader. China is having the largest trade partner with ASEAN, and China is having, many trading opportunities with the Middle East, with Latin American countries, and other global South economies, not only to have the simple trade, import and export, but be embedded into their own, development stories, meaning that it's an integral part. China's business growth and China's economic development through trade, via trade, becoming an integral part of these countries' economic development. So these economies are expanding while China's economies is growing. So the exports is not only restricted to the new three or new three, but as part of the economic solutions and part of the problem solving, I think this is more important. Equally important is that the Chinese companies, while they are going abroad like Chuhai, they have become more adaptable. The great economic connectivity today may not only be the products, the new three or new three, but the resilience itself and the influence to grow together.
We need to grow together, more cooperation and less confrontation. Thank you so much for your insights. And thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Hub on CGTN. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. I'll see you again next time.